Welcome to the channel. I'll tell you about a popular place for ghost hunters. The cold wind tore the last leaves from the crooked aspens along the road leading to a small Swedish village, lost among hills and swamps. August was already fading, but the sky looked wintry, gray, viscous, as if stretched low above the ground. The car rolled slowly along the narrow road that wound between fields and old stone fences. Andreas Lund, a documentarian and researcher of ancient legends, was driving toward a place most people refused even to glance at, Frammegården. Strange stories were told about it. Some said it was just an old parish house that had survived through centuries, others, that its walls remembered more than any human memory ever could. He turned on his tape recorder, old, creaky, but a faithful companion to all his expeditions. On the tape crackled archival recordings, fragments of interviews with the residents of a nearby village. The voice of an elderly woman said, "There's no need to stay there overnight. Not because of ghosts, but because they don't let go of those who come. The house keeps them, you understand." Andreas involuntarily shuddered. He had been studying such stories for many years, yet each new place felt special, as if it wasn't he who chose them, but they who chose him. At the roadside, a sign flashed by, old, peeling, with the inscription, Frammegården 2 kilometers. He slowed down. The road climbed upward, toward a hill where, behind bare branches, the silhouette of the house appeared. A tall roof, narrow windows, walls blackened by time. It seemed that even the air around had become thicker. When the car stopped at the gate, the engine fell silent reluctantly, as if unwilling to stay. Andreas stepped out. The air was motionless, and the silence rang in his ears. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed. The house stood enormous, dark brown, wooden, yet it looked carved out of a single block of darkness. On the porch, a sign, Frammegården Bed and Breakfast. The irony, a house with a sinister reputation now welcoming tourists seeking a paranormal experience. Andreas took out his camera, checked the lens. Everything was being recorded, from the first step to the last. He was working for his channel about mystical places of Scandinavia, and this episode was meant to be the main one. Frammegården. The house where once two children's voices had gone silent. The hostess met him at the door, a tall woman in her 50s, with thin features and pale eyes that reflected some inner cold. "Welcome," she said in Swedish. "You must be the journalist who called." "Yes. Andreas Lund. Thank you for agreeing to host me." "Few stay here for long," she said, letting him inside. "Especially at night." The floor creaked softly underfoot, as if complaining about every step. Inside, it smelled of old wood, dust, and something else, sweetly stale, like from long extinguished candle wax. On the walls hung photographs, black and white portraits of priests, old views of the estate, and, a pair of children, a boy and a girl about 7 years old. Andreas stopped. "Are these, the children?" The woman slowly nodded. "Their names were Ella and Mikael. They say they died during the Great Famine." "In the attic?" "Yes," she said, lowering her gaze. "Their parents couldn't save them. Or, didn't want to. No one really knows." She fell silent, as if frightened by her own words. "It's better not to speak of them aloud after midnight," she added quietly. "The house doesn't like it." Andreas settled into a room on the second floor. The window looked out on an old cemetery beyond the garden, where crooked crosses stood. He placed the camera on a tripod, checked the light, sat at the table and turned on the recorder. Frammegården. A small manor in Värmland. Today, a quiet hotel, but 200 years ago, a place where, according to legend, 2 children died. In the 1950s, paranormal researchers came here. The recordings from that time still frighten even skeptics. He stopped the recording. Something clicked softly in the corridor. A door? A draft? He stepped out, shone the flashlight. Nothing. Only a long hallway stretching into darkness. From below came a faint sound, like someone running a finger around the rim of a glass. Andreas went downstairs. The kitchen was empty. Only 2 old porcelain cups stood on the table. In one, milk, already curdled, in the other, dried bread. He felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. These cups looked far too old. He went back up. Outside, darkness had fallen, and rain began to drum quietly on the roof. Closer to midnight, Andreas couldn't sleep. He was going through old materials, photographs, newspaper clippings, copies of police reports. In one of them it said, "The bodies of the children were never found. The priest claims they left the house at night, but no traces were discovered." He wrote in his notebook, "Check the attic. Possible sealed entrance." At that moment, the sound came again, faint but clear. The creak of floorboards. Andreas froze. Footsteps. 1, 2, 3. Right above him. The attic. He grabbed his flashlight, his camera, and went upstairs. The staircase was narrow, covered in a dusty carpet. The door to the attic stood slightly ajar. The cold hit his face as if from winter itself. The flashlight beam revealed old trunks, a doll without eyes, cobwebs. And 2 small beds standing side by side. On one lay a toy, a wooden horse, cracked with age. On the other, a child's spoon. Andreas started recording. "The attic of Frammegården," he whispered. "Here, according to legend, the children died." At that moment, a floorboard snapped behind him. He turned sharply, nothing. Only the flashlight flickered, and for a second it seemed to him that a shadow flashed by the door. Low, like that of a child. He stood frozen, not breathing. And then he heard breathing. Very close, right by his ear. Quiet, uneven, as if someone stood behind him. "Who's there?" he breathed out. The answer was silence. Then, a faint sob. He rushed to the stairs. While descending, he almost slipped, and only on the first floor did he realize he was trembling. The camera's indicator blinked, recording was still on. He stopped it and, without turning on the light, walked to the window. Outside, the rain still poured, and in its reflection on the glass Andreas suddenly saw, behind his shoulder, deep in the room, 2 faint pale spots. Like 2 faces. He turned sharply, no one. The flashlight went out. And from afar came a quiet child's laughter. Not crying, not screaming, laughter. Short, barely audible. And then, silence. When Andreas woke in the morning, it felt as if the night had simply vanished. No recordings, no sounds. The camera had worked, but on the tape, only static. He stepped outside. The air was fresh, the sun gilded the roof. The hostess stood by the gate. "Everything all right?" she asked. He nodded. "Just a strange night." She looked at him with that same expression people have when looking at someone who has come too close to something better left unknown. "You're not the first," she said softly. "And perhaps not the last." And as he was leaving, it seemed to him that something flickered in the attic window. Two silhouettes. Small. And something white between them, like a scrap of a child's bedsheet, swaying in the wind. Since that morning when Andreas first entered the house Frammegården, he had not been able to shake the feeling that the place lived by its own memory. Not just storing the past, but chewing it over, like an old pain, again and again. He left the village for only one day. Yet all the time he thought about those children's faces that had flashed in the attic window. Whether a reflection or a residual image after a flash of fear, the longer he tried to explain it, the stronger the feeling that he didn't want to explain. In the parish archive, in the neighboring town, it smelled of dust, ink, and something resembling old candle soot. Andreas flipped through the tattered record books from the 18th to 19th centuries. And then, a line, faded, barely legible. Anno 1863. The winter was severe. Death of the pastor's children, Ella and Mikael. Cause, exhaustion. Burial, conducted without a funeral service. Without a funeral service. These two words ran cold down his spine. He made a copy of the page, photographed the seal. No date of burial, no mother's name. Only a note in the margin, in someone else's handwriting, as if added later. The bodies were not shown. It is said they were locked in the house. Nearby lay another book, the church expenses journal. There was a strange entry, purchase of lime for the basement. Under the same year. In the evening, Andreas returned to Frammegården. Outside, the fog lay low on the ground, and the house looked like a great beast crouched in the haze. The hostess met him without a smile. "You've returned." "Yes," he replied. "I found a record about the children." "Then you better not go down to the basement," she said quietly. "It still smells of earth." He didn't ask what she meant. He only recorded it on camera, as if casually, as mere words. But inside, a decision had already been born: go down to the basement at night. While it was still evening, he inspected the rest of the house. In the attic, the same two beds, the same toys. In the bedroom, an old mirror with a crack, distorting the reflection of the room. And in the corner, children's shoes, neatly paired. Too new for the 19th century, but too old to have been left recently. He turned on the recorder. According to local legend, the children died in the winter of 1863. Their father, Pastor Henrik Strand, was a man of faith, but after the death of his family, he left the parish. People say he locked the children up to protect them from illness, but he went insane himself. After that, no one lived in the house until 1901. Somewhere deep in the house, something creaked. Not just a floorboard, a long, drawn-out creak, as if someone was slowly opening an old door. Andreas stepped into the corridor. Silence. Only the wall clock ticked with an uneven rhythm. Like a heart that had lost its beat. He descended into the basement closer to midnight. The wooden staircase led down at a sharp angle, into darkness that smelled of damp and iron. The air grew heavier. The flashlight revealed low walls, hand-hewn. The floor, earthen. He stopped, noticing two long cracks running parallel across the floor. As if someone had once dug a narrow trench here and then filled it back in. He started recording on the camera. This is the basement of Frammegården. Here, according to rumors, the children were secretly buried. No traces, except these lines on the ground. And then the flashlight jerked. One flash. A second. Then, darkness. He fumbled for a spare battery, but his hand suddenly touched something cold and smooth. Stone. No. Glass. When the light flashed again, on the wall in front of him he saw a child's inscription in charcoal. Uneven letters, as if written by a trembling hand, "We are still here." He stepped back. Breathing became difficult. The air was thick, smelling of musty fabric. And then he heard a faint sound, as if someone was rummaging underground. A rustle, and a barely audible sigh. The flashlight slipped from his hands. The camera fell to the floor. On the recording later, only the flickering light and Andreas's voice could be seen. "Who's there?" Pause. "Ella." In response, a faint but unmistakable child's whisper. "Cold." The flashlight went out completely. In the morning, the hostess found Andreas sitting at the foot of the stairs. He did not remember how he had gotten out of the basement. On his hands, traces of dirt, under his nails, black earth. "You were down there?" she asked. He nodded. "What did you find?" He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "The inscription." The woman pressed her lips together. "They erase it every year. And every time it reappears." She looked at him directly. "You heard them, didn't you?" He did not answer. But at night, when he tried to sleep, he heard someone moving lightly, silently, along the corridor again. And a soft, almost imperceptible voice spoke right at the door. "We have not left." A few days later, Andreas found an old film roll in a box at the hostess's. She said she didn't know where it came from. On the shots, scenes from the 1950s. A group of people with equipment, in the basement, with flashlights and old microphones. Under one photo was written, "Contact Session. Night of February 14, 1953 inch." On the back, a faded pencil note. "Heard a child's voice. Male operator disappeared. Camera found in the morning." Andreas zoomed in on the image on his laptop. In the background, a dark spot, like the shadow of two small figures. Silhouettes. And a barely discernible white dot, at eye level, like the reflection of a flash or a gaze. He realized the house doesn't just store memories. It reproduces them. Everyone who comes, becomes part of the cycle. Those who leave, leave something of themselves in the house, photos, sound, scent, memory. And those who stay, no longer belong entirely to themselves. Late at night, he turned on the recorder and said, "Frammegården is not just a legend. It's a node where the past does not die. It contracts, pulses, and searches for new witnesses. Perhaps we ourselves are what it needs so it can continue remembering." Then from behind the wall came a soft knocking. 3 beats. Pause. 2 more. As if someone was keeping a rhythm. And then a child's voice, whispering, very close. Tell about us again. He dropped the recorder. On the tape after that, only breathing, footsteps, and faint laughter. The old film reel that Andreas found in a box at the hostess's had become an obsession. It was marked in faded ink. Frammegården, February 1953. The film smelled of iron and dust, as if it carried not just images, but the very breath of those who had touched it. He took it to a small studio in Karlstad, where a familiar operator carefully restored the material. From the first frames, it was clear, this was not staged. On the screen, flickering in black and white grain, stood 4 men and 1 woman. All in wool coats, with lamps and bulky equipment. On a sign, an inscription in Swedish, Institute of Psychic Research, Gothenburg. They stood in the basement of Frammegården. On the wall, the same marks that Andreas had seen. The same lines in the earth. One of the researchers, tall, with a mustache, held a microphone resembling a metal mushroom. He spoke clearly, measuredly, as if conducting a scientific experiment. If anyone is here, give us a sign. We will not harm you. Only sound. Only voice. In response, silence. Then, a faint crackling, like interference. The woman beside him closed her eyes, pressing her palms to her chest. In the next frame, the light from the lamps trembled. Someone shouted. There's movement. In the corner. The camera turned, and for a moment, the one Andreas would watch over and over again, against the wall, in the depths of the basement, appear 2 pale shadows. Not silhouettes, but as if transparent outlines of children, frozen in motion. At the same moment, the image tore. Then, a strange sound, as if someone whispered directly into the microphone. Mom, we're cold. When the recording was fully restored, it turned out that the operator indeed disappeared during the filming. On the last frame, his hand, reaching toward the darkness, and a sharp clap. A sound like a door slamming. After that, an empty frame. Only dust, slowly falling in the flashlight beam. Andreas watched the video on his laptop in his room at Frammegården. In the dim light of the monitor, the operator's face before disappearing looked distorted, not by fear, but by astonishment. As if he had seen someone he knew. He paused the video, rewound it. In the 3 frames before the clap, he noticed, a child's hand appears on the floor, reaching toward the man. Fingers barely touching his coat. After that frame, emptiness. In 1953, the Institute of Psychic Research conducted 4 night sessions in Frammegården. Of 5 participants, only 3 survived. One died of a heart attack a week later, another took his own life 3 months later. The woman vanished without a trace. Reports noted, audiovisual hallucinations observed, collective stress. But none of the witnesses denied hearing the children's voices. On the recording, there was a moment no one could explain. After the operator disappeared, the microphone continued recording for 3 more minutes. There, one could hear children talking. 2 voices, a boy and a girl. They spoke in Old Swedish, with an accent long and used. A translator helped Andreas decipher. Why did they come? They want to see us. Mom said we must sleep. But I'm still hungry. That evening, Andreas could not tear himself away from the recording. He listened to it again and again, until he noticed something else. On the 46th second, between the children's phrases, a third sound appears. Quiet, raspy, as if through rusty iron. Leave them, he increased the frequency, and the voice became clearer. Male. Hollow, tired. And one that could only be heard if you knew it was not human. At night, he awoke to a barely audible crack. On the laptop, the film turned on again, though he had turned it off. The screen flickered, and the image seemed to blur, as if someone were scratching it from the inside. Then Andreas realized the image had subtly changed. In one frame, the operator was no longer alone, next to him stood a figure in a long cassock. The face was unseen. Only a silhouette. He pressed stop. The frame froze. The cassock, white hands, and the shadow on the wall, two child figures nearby. In the morning, the hostess brought him a cup of coffee and placed beside it an old newspaper clipping. The headline: Mystery of the disappearance at Frammegården. Research participant vanished without a trace. In the photo, the very same operator. The article stated that after his disappearance, the local pastor forbade any spiritual practices in the house. But over the years, people still returned, those who wanted to hear. You know, said the hostess, since then, every 20 years someone comes and records the same thing. Children's voices. She nodded. And always, too. A girl and a boy. Never alone. Why don't you leave? The woman smiled slightly. Who says I still can? Andreas recorded everything. He planned to leave in the morning, but at night, when he began gathering the equipment, he heard the familiar crackling of the speaker. The microphone turned on by itself. Noise, then, a voice. The same one from the 1953 film. Why did you come? You want to hear us? He did not answer. Instead, he lifted the camera and aimed it at a dark corner of the room. In the lens, nothing. But in the headphones, breathing. Light, intermittent, very close. Cold. Ella. In response, laughter. Childlike. And a quiet whisper of a second voice. He will stay too. The camera screen went dark. On the recording afterward, static noise, like the wind. And among it, barely discernible, a song, an old Swedish lullaby, sung to children in the 19th century. In the morning, everything looked normal. But on the wall of the room, just beneath the mirror, he saw fresh traces of children's palms. Small, perfectly imprinted in the dust. 2. Autumn arrived suddenly, with cold air and a sky heavy with clouds. Andreas returned to Frammegården a year later. This time, not alone. With him were 3. Lena, a documentary camera woman with short, black hair. Joel, a silent giant of a technician with cameras and motion sensors. And the medium, Emma Nord, a woman with pale eyes, as if clouded from within. Their project was called Beyond the Light. The new episode was meant to show that legends are just traces of human memory. But Andreas hadn't told the team that the previous year had left more than just a trace. He had left an echo. The house greeted them as before, silently. The windows dark, like empty eye sockets. The hostess greeted them briefly. You still want to stay the night? Yes, Andreas replied. Just one. Then remember, she said. If you hear footsteps in the attic, do not go up. Never. Joel snorted. Yeah, right, don't go up, what's all this equipment for then? She didn't smile. Because sometimes those who go up, do not come back themselves. Only their steps remain. They set up the equipment, on the first floor, night vision cameras, in the basement, a thermal imager and a microphone with sound amplification, in the attic, a laser grid to track movement. Lena started recording. Emma sat by the fireplace, eyes closed. She barely touched the floor with her fingertips. "Here, the silence is strange," she whispered. "As if the house is breathing." "Perfect," smirked Joel. "Let it breathe, just into the microphone." Andreas silently turned on the recorder. Midnight. The cameras showed ordinary scenes, empty rooms, static walls. But Emma flinched. "They are already here." "Who are they?" asked Lena, not taking her eyes off the lens. "The children." She raised her hand, as if listening. "They're scared, they're looking for their mother." In the speaker, the basement microphone crackled softly. Noise, then, a short knock. 2 beats, pause, another. Joel frowned. "That could be dripping water." "It's dry," Andreas said. "I checked." The knock repeated. 3 beats. And then silence. Closer to 1 a.m., Emma suddenly screamed. She sat up straight. In the attic, movement. Joel rushed to the monitor, switched the camera. On the screen, the room with 2 children's beds, covered in dust. At first, nothing. Then, across the laser grid, a wave of distortion ran. Red dots flickered, as if someone had walked right through them. Lena exhaled. "My God, something's moving in there." No one went up. "No one," Joel said, not looking away. A second, and the sound. A child's laugh. Quiet, brief, as if from another world. Emma pressed her temples. "They're playing. But they're cold. They still haven't found their mother." Andreas stood up. "I'll go upstairs." "Are you crazy?" Lena said. "We can see there's something there." "Exactly," he replied. "I must see it." The attic greeted him with icy air. The flashlight trembled in his hand. Dust in the beam looked like smoke. 2 beds. A toy horse. And, a child's spoon on the floor, right at the entrance. Only now it gleamed, as if polished recently. "Ella? Mikael?" He whispered, naming the children, "Are you here?" No answer, only behind him, a quiet breath. He turned, empty. The flashlight flickered. And in that moment, he saw, in the depths of the room, 2 figures. Indistinct, like fog. A boy and a girl. He froze. "I've come to tell your story." The boy stepped forward. Pale face, eyes, empty like mirrors. "You've already told it," he said quietly. "Now it's our turn." Downstairs, Lena screamed. On the monitor the image jerked. The camera showed Andreas standing still. Then, a shadow behind him, stretching along the wall. The shadow of an adult man in a cassock. For a moment, a hand rested on Andreas's shoulder. The screen flickered, and the camera cut out. "Damn!" Joel shouted. "Lost connection." Emma clutched the armrest of her chair. They're holding him. The house is holding him. In the speaker, breathing. At first quiet, then heavy, wheezing. And suddenly, a child's whisper, "Don't open the door." When Andreas came to, he was sitting at the foot of the stairs. The light hurt his eyes. Joel shook him by the shoulders. "Damn, are you okay?" He nodded, but could not find his voice. Lena was pointing at the camera screen. On the recording it shows, he stands in the attic, then, a flash of light, and beside him appears the second silhouette. The same pastor. Then, two child figures, taking him by the hands. The frame flickers. And the last thing visible, all three vanish into the shadows. After that, the camera falls, and only the sound of footsteps is heard. Children's. Running across the floor, clear, joyful. When they left the house in the morning, Emma said quietly. "They didn't take the body, they took the memory." He remembered what he hadn't known. Lena asked. "You mean he saw what had been?" "No," she replied. "He became what he saw." A week later, Joel sent Lena a fragment of sound, recovered from the attic camera. At first noise. Then, Andreas's voice. They found Mother. And a quiet lullaby, whispered in two voices. The last words barely audible, "Now you are with us." The house sank into silence. Real silence, not the kind where there's simply no sound, but the kind that seems to hear itself. Andreas stood at the foot of the stairs, unable to remember how he had come down from the attic. He only remembered the faces. Two pale spots in the darkness, eyes without pupils, like two reflections of light. He inhaled, the air was thick, smelling of iron and dust. Through the murky window, a shaft of dawn light pierced, but time seemed wrong, the sky outside was dark, as before a storm. He stepped forward. The floor beneath his feet groaned softly. "Lena?" he called. Silence. "Joel?" No answer. The camera on the tripod by the wall turned on by itself. A blinking light, a soft click, and the screen came alive. On it, the room where he stood, only empty. Andreas looked at the screen, he was not there. He couldn't see himself. He blinked. Looked around. No, everything was in place, table, chair, stairs. But in the lens, no one. As if the camera was filming another world, where he did not exist. He climbed to the second floor. The stairs creaked mournfully, the air grew colder with each step. On the wall, a family portrait. A pastor, his wife, and two children. He had seen this photo many times in old chronicles, but now the faces looked different. The children were paler, their eyes opened wider. And the mother, she smiled, but in her smile was something wrong, stretched, unnatural. He reached for the frame, and heard a child's whisper behind him. "Don't touch. He's watching." Andreas spun around sharply. Empty. He lifted the camera, aimed the light down the corridor. Dust swirled in the air like a living substance. Among it, a silhouette. Small, childlike. "Ella?" His voice cracked. "Mikael?" The figure stood still. Then slowly raised its hand, and pointed to the door at the end of the corridor. He approached. The door, old, crooked, with an iron lock. Only now the lock was open. Behind the door, the attic. The same one. Though he was certain he had just descended from there a minute ago. He entered. The air became icy. The flashlight jumped across the walls. Cobwebs, old toys, children's beds. And suddenly, a quiet singing. The song came from somewhere beneath the floor. He went down on his knees. The floorboards were uneven, rotten in places. From the gaps, a thin stream of cold. The floor beneath him shuddered. The flashlight slipped from his hands. The light rolled to the side, illuminating the corner of the room, where two old dolls lay. Only now they were sitting upright, turned to face him. Their glass eyes reflected the light. In the next instant, one doll slowly tilted its head. "You must remember," said the voice. Not a child's. Male. Hollow, deep, as if resonating through the earth itself. "You stood here before. You closed the door. You left them." "No," Andreas exhaled. At that moment the floor collapsed. He fell into darkness. He awoke, in the basement. Ice under his hands. Above him, a ceiling crumbling with plaster. He did not remember how he got there. In the corner, a candle. Burning steadily, as if waiting for him. Next to it, an old child's spoon, covered in rust. On the wall, finger marks, small, in the dirt. In the center, an inscription, as if scratched with nails, "Mother didn't come." He stepped back, and heard breathing. Behind him. Heavy, close. He slowly turned. Before him stood the pastor. Face featureless, only the outline of a skull beneath the skin. Cassock, black, soaked in darkness. "You. Who are you?" "I am the one who opened the door. And the one who closed it." He raised his hand, and behind him, two faint shadows ignited. "The children. They're hungry," said the pastor. "You must feed them with memory." Andreas closed his eyes. "What do you want from me?" "To remember what it was like, to stand on the other side of the door. When they called. When you did not answer." He felt cold on his cheeks, as if small hands touched his face. And a whisper, very quiet. "Now we have found Mother." When Andreas opened his eyes, he was sitting on the floor in the living room. Daylight, gray, seeped through the windows. Lena stood by the entrance, pale, with red eyes. "Where have you been?" she asked. He could not answer. On his palms, dirt. On his shirt, dust and ash. In his pocket, a small spoon. That very one. He took it out and stared at it for a long time. On the back, among the rust, a faint inscription appeared. "E.M. Ella." "Mikael." Lena whispered. "The cameras, they recorded everything." He looked at her. "What did they show?" She did not answer immediately. "You were in the basement. Alone." But the voices, they were not children's. They were calling you. That night he did not sleep. He listened to the recordings. On the 6th minute, you can hear his breathing, footsteps. Then, other footsteps. Two light, quick ones. And a voice. "Now you are with us." He turned off the recorder. The room smelled of dust and wax. And somewhere beneath the floor, almost imperceptibly, a child's laughter sounded again. Snow lay on the ground in a thin, fragile layer. Frammegården stood as it always had, motionless, silent, as if it were not a house but a stone web, at the center of which something waited. A month had passed since that night. The video had never been released. Lena sold the equipment, Joel left the country. Andreas disappeared. Only the recordings remained. But on the first frames, ordinary preparations, checking the lights, Lena's voice, Joel's laughter. On the last frames, Andreas stands in the attic, the flashlight trembling, and in the background, a child's laughter is heard. Then, a sharp flash, interference. And the image changes. In the frame, the old pastor appears. His face half hidden in shadow, and behind him, two children stand side by side, holding someone's hand. Then everything goes dark. But if you listen closely, the recording can be heard saying, "Now he remembers." The house stands empty. Since then, no one has dared to spend the night there. The owner passed away a few months later, quietly, in her sleep. Locals say that at night, when the snow falls especially thick, a small light can sometimes be seen in the windows of the second floor. As if someone walks with a lantern, stops by the attic, and stares outside for a long time. Nearby is the old family farm in Skillingmark, a place where in summer you can have dinner and celebrate the traditional midsummer festival. It is also considered one of the most visited places in Sweden because of its dark past.